I call this meeting to order and welcome to meeting number 83 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, April 17, 2023, we're continuing our study of Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act, and today we are continuing clause-by-clause consideration. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. I'd call on members to make sure that they are careful with the earpieces and microphones so that there is no feedback or Larsen effect that would affect the health and safety of our interpreters, who I'd like to salute and thank you. We're applauding them, giving them a round of applause too. Thank you very much for what you do for us interpreters. We have Mr. Mark Shan, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategy and Innovation Policy Sector, Mr. Jameson McKay, Director General Investment Review Branch, James Burns, Senior Director Investment Review Branch, Mehmet Karman, Senior Policy Analyst, Investment Review Board. They're here to answer our questions. We'll resume our clause-by-clause consideration. Thank you to everyone for being in attendance. And again, my apologies for the delayed start because it's the voting season in the House. We often are a tad behind, but let's start without further ado. Now we'll pick up where we left off for Clause 16 with Mr. Perkins' amendment, rebaptised CPC 11.2, but it was under a different number previously. Mr. Perkins had moved the amendment, and you have the floor, Mr. Perkins, once again.
Tend to get confused with all these amendments and clauses. Just to clarify, this was the one I was distributing at the end of the last meeting, which had the reference number ending in 376, I think. And everyone's got that? Great. So this section amends Clause 16, as we know, and it comes directly from, well, not directly, it wasn't drafted that way, but the genesis of the idea comes from Recommendation 6 in the INDU report on the Investment Canada Act that was released, I think, in 2021. And just so if I could reference members to that, Recommendation 6 said that the Government of Canada encouraged Canadian entities to keep ownership of intangible assets developed with federal funds, including intellectual property, by requiring, when appropriate, that they return the monies received from the federal government or subsidies in full or in part. So the amendment, the proposed amendment, is drafted to reflect that, and the report at the time said that the question is not whether a foreign investment can be threatened by Canada's national security. Virtually all witnesses in that report recognize that. Rather, the question is whether the Investment Canada Act and its administration effectively protect Canada's national security in evolving circumstances. And I think on the intangible asset side, we had quite a bit of testimony on the issue of how our economy has evolved over the last 20 years from a tangible asset economy, as we've heard Mr. Balsillie talk about, to intangible, that more than 90%, for example, of the S&P 500 value is now in intangible assets. So there's a concern about those assets that are developed, in particular in Canada. And, you know, my rough calculations, and the ISED officials probably have a better figure than I, but if you include the SR&ED tax credit, I think we're spending just in that area about $16 billion or so, granting councils, the clusters, all of the various programs that ISED has, plus the SR&ED tax credit. We're spending quite a bit on invention, as I'll call it, the invention, which leads to IP. And we've seen recent issues, which I know the officials have been dealing with, for example, related to COVID in Medicago in Quebec City, where over $200 million of taxpayer money was invested in producing a plant-based COVID vaccine, which apparently has Health Canada approval, but yet has not been produced, and now that company has been sold and we don't have access to it. So there's a concern of not that we want to stop the free flow of capital in capital markets, who wouldn't want to do that, but if that IP involves that kind of situation where you have over $200 million of taxpayer money to develop it, that consideration be given in the review of net benefit and the requirement, if that IP leaves the country, that some part of that, if not all of it, be paid back via a price of doing business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins. Are there other questions or comments before we move to a vote on the amendment proposed by Mr. Perkins?
I guess I should ask the officials if they wanted to comment on this.
Mr. Chair, I think the member has laid out the intention of the amendment. I think we would just note that this is amending the national security process, and so the nexus to national security of the repayment would be an important consideration. And then obviously just to note that many of our programmatic mechanisms do have specific clauses that are specific to the programs around the consideration of intellectual property when there's change of control.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shan. Mr. Fast.
Yes, question to the officials. Have you been able to quantify how much of the value of the taxpayer-paid research that is done in Canada escapes our country or leaves our country through acquisitions and otherwise?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't be in a position to offer a number on that, in part because the benefits of research are multifold and aren't simply expressed in the value of one particular aspect of that, which would be potentially either a tangible or intangible value.
Well, my point is this, Mr. Chair. There are two ways in which Canadians invest in research and in the value that's inherent in intellectual property. One way is we educate our children. We educate Canadians. These are the human resources that drive our economy. And we have taken great pride in the fact that our country is well educated, that we invest reasonably heavily in our education system. We could probably do more, but I think it's fair to say that Canada is among the most educated countries in the world. And it should be reflected in what our economy produces, especially when it comes to intellectual property, intangible value. So we invest in their education, but we also directly invest as taxpayers in the research institutions that we have within our federal government. And sadly, over the years, it's become apparent that a significant part of that research, or the value of that research, is lost to the Canadians because those companies are unable or unwilling to commercialize within Canada, are bought out and end up being owned by companies elsewhere in the world, primarily United States, but also Chinese companies, Japanese companies will buy out Canadian companies. And the value of that research that Canadian taxpayers invested effectively disappears. It may have created temporary jobs along the way, research-driven jobs, but at the end of the day, the actual value of that research, as is translated into intellectual property and the value in that IP, is gone. Which is why I feel that this is a reasonable amendment to put forward, to Clause 16. I think we will serve Canadians very well. Yep. And by the way, incentivize taxpayers indirectly to welcome these kinds of investments, because if in fact those investments are lost because of purchases by foreign companies, we at least get the initial investment back. We'll never get back the dollars that we invested in our children's education, especially if those children leave our country. But this is at least a step forward, and something very tangible that we can do to be accountable for taxpayers' dollars that are being invested in research. So I encourage our members here to support this particular amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fast. So if there are no more comments on CPC 11.2, I will call it to a vote, Madam Clerk, and just giving time for our Vice Chair to take back a seat, but you can start. Thank you.
Mr. Fillmore.
Opposed.
Mr. Sorbera.
Opposed, please.
Mr. Kahir.
Against.
Madame Lapointe.
Contre.
Mr. Van Balen.
Opposed.
Monsieur Genever.
Pour.
Mr. Perkins.
For.
Mr. Viss.
For.
Mr. Fast.
For.
Monsieur Lemire.
Contre.
And Mr. Massey.
For. So the amendment is rejected. Are there any more amendments on clause 16? Shall clause 16 carry? Yes. Moving on to clause 17. Are there any amendments on clause 17? Nope. If there are no amendments on clause 17, we will move on. Shall clause 17 carry?
Monsieur le Président, je peux-tu amener le...
What about Liv 1? Can I move that? Well, yes, you can, Mr. Lemire. In the absence, well, Lib 1 strikes me as important. It wasn't technically up to me to move it. Ms. Lapointe, it was your proposal which had to do with clause 17, wasn't it?
Donc, l'amendement
Lib 1, for members' reference, it's 12447492, moved by Mr. Lemire, in this case, in relation to clause 17. Does everyone have the amendment, Lib 1, in front of them? I think you all do. Are there any comments to make in relation to amendment Lib 1? Mr. Perkins.
If I'm understanding, since there hasn't been an introduction for this one, that this proposed amendment compels the minister to notify the National Security and Intelligence Committee, NSICOP, a national review agency, of any decision rendered regarding a national security review process. The notification will include the identity of the non-Canadian subject to review, the terms of the investment, and whether a divestment decision is taken. And when I read this, I have a couple of questions, and maybe the officials can comment, because I think officials have already said here in committee that the Intelligence Review Agency is already a key part of the national security review process, along with other government agencies like the RCMP. So why should the Intelligence Review Agency be required to receive additional notification if they're already part of the process? It looks to me like this time we're actually doing suspenders in a belt, where suspenders in a belt's been rejected previously.
Mr. Chair, the national security community that we were referring to in discussion about who is involved in national security reviews includes the Department of Public Safety and the equity agencies that are aligned with it, including the RCMP, CSIS, and CSE. This amendment brings into play NCIRA and NSICOP, which are investigative bodies that are not part of the national security departments.
Yes, Mr. Perkins.
So they're investigative parties, but they're not being given an investigative role with this amendment. As I understand it, under the amendment, the members of NSICOP are not privy to the details as to why a divestment decision was taken, that the committee members, if they are involved, should be involved. When I look at it, it just says the identity of the Canadian, the non-Canadian subject to review and the terms of the investment, and whether an investment decision has been taken, but it doesn't talk about the fact that the details of the why or the why not for that investment decision is there. Am I missing something here? Because it looks to me like all they're being informed of is that there's an investigation, not playing any real role in it other than just saying it's an investigation. So I don't see the purpose of it.
Mr. Chair, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians and the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency have responsibility for looking at the treatment of national security information, not the outcomes or decisions reached with that national security information, but actually the treatment of the information. This amendment simply ensures that they include the national security information that would be a part of an Investment Canada national security decision.
Can you, what's treatment mean? How, I'm struggling with what that, treatment is what?
The two bodies referenced in the amendment are an oversight body. They are often provided with the process issues around the treatment of national security information, not the outcomes of the decision. So they're not a review body for the purposes of appealing decisions related to national security. They're to ensure that the treatment of the national security information was actually appropriate. Kept secret and was handled in a reasonable manner.
Well, why wouldn't it be anyway? Why is this needed then? Because I presume anyone that is brought into the process is bound by those conditions already.
That is currently the impact of the law. This is, as I understand it, a mechanism for improved transparency.
I think I'll oppose this because I just don't see the need for it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins. So if there are no more questions and comments on Lib 1 moved by Mr. Lemire, I will call it to a vote. Madame Lagreffière.
Madam Clerk.
Mr. Fillmore.
En faveur.
Mr. Sorbara.
La même chose, clerk. En faveur.
Same, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Gahir.
In favor?
Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Oui.
Mr. Généreux.
Non.
Mr. Perkins.
No.
Mr. Viss.
No.
Mr. Fast.
No.
Monsieur Lemire.
En faveur.
Mr. Massey.
Yes.
Seven yeas, 4 nays.
Alors, l'amendement Lib.
The amendment Lib 1 is carries. That brings us to, well, if there are any other amendments to Clause 17.
17. Shall Clause 17 carry? As amended. Thank you.
I think it's 7.
Are there amendments to Clause 18? Shall Clause 18 carry? Yes. Moving on to Clause 19. Are there amendments to Clause 19? I recognize Madame Lapointe.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson.
3 amendments have the aim of increasing the transparency and accountability. And it really stems from what we heard from the witnesses here, as well as from members during various readings and the consultations. So the first amendment that's being proposed deals with amending by adding after line 15 on page 13 the following, 3, subparagraph 36, 4, E2, Roman numeral 2, that the act is replaced by the following. Authorize the investment, including if it did so on terms and conditions or. So this amendment aims to, as I said earlier, improve the transparent accountability. And what it does is it allows the minister to disclose that a final order authorized an investment. including if it was on the basis of terms and conditions. And I would invite our officials here today to maybe speak on how this change reaches that goal of transparency and accountability.
As noted, this amendment clarifies that the minister may disclose that a final order authorized an investment, including if it included terms and conditions. This is a clarification of what we believe to be existing interpretation, but ensures that we actually have full understanding of the minister's ability to do this. The minister would therefore allowed to, as he communicates the conclusion of the NICA process, note that there was an authorization of investment, and also to note the terms upon which it was reached.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. And Mr. Perkins.
Thank you. Does it only apply to authorizations, or does it also apply when the minister has decided to decline allowing the investment, that we notify the reasons?
This is already applied to blocks. This is simply clarifying that it also applies to authorizations.
Okay, so, but we don't do this now?
We have not, in recent past, announced when we've authorized investments, including on their conditions.
No, but this is authorizing giving it to government agencies, right? We haven't been authorized. If I read it,
This is
it allows the
disclosure to the
minister to
public.
disclose privileged information to foreign government agencies, right?
This is disclosure to the public.
Okay. I've read it, so it's not just about disclosing to foreign agencies. Am I reading the wrong Liberal amendment, Liberal 2?
Yeah, Liberal 2. Madame Lapointe.
So it's my understanding, and I'm going to ask for the officials to confirm that, is previously the Act included some ambiguity whether the minister could disclose final orders if an investment was authorized with terms and conditions. And is that indeed what we're trying to remove that ambiguity?
Yeah. Merci, Madame Lapointe. Est-ce qu'il y a
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Are there any other questions or comments?
comments or questions on Lib 2? No? So we'll call it to a vote. Madame la Greffière.
Ms. Clerk, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Sorbera,
Yes, please.
Mr. Gahir,
In favor?
Madame Lapointe,
En faveur?
Mr. Van Bynen,
Yes.
Mr. Généreux,
Oui.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Viss. Yes. Mr. Fast. Yes. Mr. Lemire,
Oui.
Mr. Massey,
Yes, please.
Okay, so the amendment is adopted. Moving on, still on clause 19, are there other amendments? Madame Lapointe.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Amendment, and I will repeat again, that aims to increase the transparency and accountability around this. And this amendment would allow the minister to disclose the names of companies that are subject to final national security orders. And so the change that is being recommended is that Bill C-34 in Clause 19 be amended by adding after line 15 on page 13 the following. 3. Section 36 of the Act is amended by adding the following after subsection 4.1. 4.101. For greater certainty, when communicating or disclosing under paragraph 4E2, the fact that an order was made under subsection 25.41, the minister is not prohibited from communicating or disclosing the identity of the non-Canadian and of the Canadian business or entity referred to in paragraph 25.1C that is the subject of the order.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Lapointe.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe.
Perkins.
So, I think I agree with, although the intent. I think the parent rule applies here, doesn't it, on this amendment? In that Bill C-42 does not actually amend this clause in the actual Investment Canada Act. So I'm not sure that the actual proposed amendment is in order because there's no reference to this clause in the bill, as I understand it.
Mr. Perkins, I'll take your point of order under advisement and verify with the legislative clerks, but all amendments have been thoroughly analyzed to see if they were receivable or not ahead of time, and it was deemed receivable, but I'll take it under advisement and
I'm
check
just
with
curious
the legislative
because for
clerks.
the
But in the
same-
meantime, Mr. Perkins, I'll just move to Mr. Viss, who had his hand up before
Sure.
your point of order, and I'll get back to you.
So I'm just looking for consistency
Yep.
with the ones that were ruled out of order for the same reason.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Viss.
Isn't it to the officials, just the second part of the amendment, the minister is not prohibited from communicating or disclosing the identity of the non-Canadian and of the Canadian business or entity referred to in paragraph 25.1. Isn't that already the case?
This is a clarification of what we understand to be the existing interpretation, and this is a power that the minister has used. The minister has disclosed the names of companies that have been the subject of orders. This is simply ensuring that the transparency standard that's been adopted is never open to ambiguity, and this is clarifying that.
Are you telling me, through you, Mr. Chair, that the regulatory approach that was voted against in some of the amendments we put forward hasn't worked to the benefit of Canada in the interpretation by the minister in conducting national security reviews and or communicating that information to the public, and therefore we need to improve this legislation by enshrining in law what regulation had done previously?
Mr. Chair, my comment was that there may exist in some quarters some ambiguity about the current process, and this is simply a clarification of existing practice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. If there are no more questions and comments on Lib 3, I'll just take a few minutes to discuss with the legislative clerks regarding the point of order brought forth by Mr. Perkins. So I guess I will very briefly suspend.
3, 7, NDP 2, and NDP 4 were, I believe, ruled out of order for the same reason.
We'll suspend briefly and come back in about 2 to 3 minutes.
Thanks.
After consultation with the legislative clerks, if you look at, for instance, Article 15 and 16 of the bill, the disposition of the law at Article where is the amendment? At Article 25.4 is already amended. It's already opened. So as soon as this clause of the original bill is is modified by the bill, then it opens it up. So that's why it doesn't, the ruling that I've made on the previous disposition or previous clauses does not apply to this one because the bill already opens 25.4 to amendments and 36 as well.
This
But Mr.
opens
Perkins, just to
4.1.
be clear, I'm not.
Opens 4.1 a different, I'm not sure, it's not.
If you look
opens
at Article
4.1.
15 and 16 of the bill, they open up amendments to 25.4. If I'm reading it correctly, with the help of the legislative clerk. So I've ruled on your point of order, Mr. Perkins. So it's not up for debate at this point. But I appreciate you bringing it up because we need to be consistent in the rulings. So thank you for that. And on that note, are there any more comments on the amendment proposed by Madame Lapointe, Lib 3? If there are none, I would call it to a vote. Madame la Greffière.
Mr. Fillmore,
In favor.
Mr. Sorbera,
Yes, please.
Mr. Gahir,
In favor?
Madame Lapointe,
En faveur?
Mr. Van Bynen,
In favor.
Monsieur Généreux,
Yes.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes,
Mr. Viss,
Abstain.
Mr. Fast. Yes. Monsieur Lemire,
Pour.
Mr. Massey,
Yes, please.
yeas pour 10, nays contre 0.
Oui, donc l'amendement Lib.
Amendment Lib 3 carries.
If there are no more amendments on Clause 19, shall Clause 19 carry as amended? Or are there any more amendments? I'm sorry, Madame Lapointe, I didn't see your hand. So on Clause 19, there are more amendments? Yes. Oh, okay, c'est pas. No, Madame Lapointe, if I'm not mistaken, it's Lib 4 that you want to move? That's a new, c'est un nouvel article, donc c'est après.
That's a new clause, so it'll be after clause 19.
Clause 19 carry as amended. Yes? No?
Are you moving Lib 4?
Lib 4 will be moved after because it creates a new clause. It's
Oh, okay.
19.1.
Okay,
So it's carried as amended.
sure.
Now, Madame Lapointe. On Lib 4, I believe.
OK, Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This amendment would improve the transparency and accountability by ensuring that the annual report, which is required to be published, would include details on the use of the minister's duties and powers for national security review. And this would include, for example, the new powers on interim conditions and accepting binding undertakings to mitigate national security risk. So the proposed change, the proposed amendment to Bill C-34 would be by adding after line 15 on page 13 the following new clause. 19.1, section 38.1 of the Act is renumbered as subsection 38.1, subsection 1, and is amended by adding the following: 2. The report shall include information on the exercise of ministerial duties and powers under Part 4.1.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Lapointe.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Any comments or questions?
Again, this is more a point of order at this stage than a content. As I read it, adding a new section to Section 38 again is a parent rule issue because Bill C-42 does not amend Section 38.1, so adding a new section is, in my view, and that of some of the legal advice we got from the Library of Parliament, out of order because of the parent rule.
Parfait, Monsieur Perkins. Quant à votre
Perfect, Mr. Perkins. Concerning your point of order, Part 4 is open And when that is reviewed by the team of the legislative clerk, as Part 4 is open for the same reason as I just said in reference to Lib 3, Lib 4 is deemed in order by the chair.
What section the legislative clerk says that it's that is open as a result that allows this amendment?
Just one moment, Mr. Perkins. Alors, Monsieur Perkins,
Mr. Perkins, Part 4.1 in the enabling legislation includes those clauses which are open in the bill that was tabled, that we voted on at second reading, and that is why Lib 4 is deemed in order.
You're saying section 4.1, but this is
Yes.
amending, where am I missing it? Because this is amending section
no,
38,
at this point,
isn't it? No, I'm
Mr.
just trying to
at this point,
understand.
Mr. Perkins, I'll have to say I've ruled on this point of order that you brought. But if you need some clarifications and precisions with the legislative clerks, I suggest you take it offline because the rulings of the chair are not up for debate. And
Okay,
in this
we can-
case, there is no. I have ruled on that point.
Okay, I'd like to challenge the chair on that.
But it's oh, one moment. Okay, fair enough, Mr. You helped me learn the procedural rules of this committee as it is our last meeting, so I appreciate. But my ruling on this point of order has been challenged by Mr. Perkins. So, Madam Clerk, if it's possible to put it to a vote, shall my decision be sustained? Yes.
Mr. Fillmore,
It shall.
Mr. Sorbera,
Yes, of course.
Mr. Gahir,
In favor?
Madame Lapointe,
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen,
Yes.
Monsieur Generer,
No.
Mr. Perkins,
No.
Mr. Viss, Mr. Fast, Monsieur Lemire,
En faveur?
Mr. Massey,
Yes.
So the chair's decision is sustained. So we are still on Lib 4. Are there any more questions or comments on Lib 4? Mr. Viss.
To the officials, to clarify, so in a hypothetical situation, the minister has made a ruling on a foreign state-owned enterprise that was subject to a national security review. Under this amendment, he's going to publish an annual report on the decisions he's made and the powers he's exercised therewith in respect to those decisions. Is that correct? That is correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. Are there any more comments on Lib 4? Then shall Lib 4 carry? Actually, yes, Madam Clerk, let's proceed to vote.
Mr. Fillmore,
Yes.
Mr. Sorbera,
Yes.
Mr. Gahir,
In favor?
Madame Lapointe,
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen,
Yes.
Monsieur Generer,
No.
Mr. Perkins,
No.
Mr. Viss, Mr. Fast, Monsieur Lemire,
En faveur?
Mr. Massey.
Yes.
Yeas 7, nays 4.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, l'amendement Lib
Lib 4 carries.
qui nous amène
That brings us to clause 20 of the bill. Mr. Perkins.
Ask the officials to explain the change to the Investment Canada Act with the proposals in Clause 20 of Bill C-34.
Mr. Chair, Bill Clause number 21. This amendment adds clarifying language to denote that if the foreign investor has failed to give notice in accordance with Section 12 or file an application in accordance with Section 17, the minister may send a demand letter requiring the foreign investor to stop the contravention, remedy the situation, show why there is no contravention, or, in the case of undertakings, justify the noncompliance. In Bill Clause 22, the amendment to paragraph 39(1)B reflects the changes made to Section 12 and provides that a breach in the pre-implementation filing requirement will allow the minister to send a demand letter to the foreign investor, requiring them to cease the contravention, to remedy the default, or to show cause why there is no contravention of the Investment Canada Act. We would note that the demand letter is not required to proceed to an application for court order for contravening the pre-implementation filing requirement as set out in subsection 41 and reflected in Clause 21. On Clause 23, this amendment reflects the changes made in Section 25(3) and provides that the minister may send a demand letter to a foreign investor who does not comply with their written undertakings referred to in Section 25(3)(6)(c) or 25(3)(31)(a), or the minister's order made under Section 25(3). The demand letter will require the foreign investor to cease the contravention, to remedy the default, or to show cause why there is no contravention of the Investment Canada Act, or in the case of undertakings, to justify any noncompliance. And then finally, Mr. Chair, 24, this change in paragraph 39(2)(a) reflects the changes made to Section 25(12). Paragraph 39(2)(a). Page 14 of the bill. 13 to 14. It starts on 13.
Thank you. Found it.
The change in paragraph 39(2)(a) reflects the changes made to Section 25(12) and 25(5), allowing the minister to send a demand letter to a person or entity that failed to provide information when requested for national security review. The addition of paragraph 39(2)(b) reflects the amendments to sections 25(3)(6)(c) or 25(31)(a), allowing the minister to send a demand letter to the person or entity that failed to comply with their undertakings. The addition of paragraph 39(2)(c) further clarifies that the minister may send a demand letter to the person or entity if they did not comply with an order made under sections 25(3) or 25(4).
Thank you, Mr. Shan.
So is this simply, does the minister have this power in the process before? Is this a new power in the process, or is it just trying to make it compliant with the new advanced power or advance notice rather than afterwards? Is that what it's trying to make it consistent so that in the case, because the minister now doesn't have to wait till it's over, he can?
The minister has this power and does not have it yet for the new powers of pre-implementation filing. So this is applying the existing powers of the minister to the new pre-implementation filing.
Okay. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. If there's no other comments about Clause 20, shall Clause 20 carry? Yes?
Moving on to Clause 21. Are there amendments or questions on Clause 21? Shall Clause 21 carry? A recorded vote on Clause 21. Madame la Greffière.
Madam Clerk.
Fillmore.
Yes.
Mr. Sorbera.
Yes, please.
Mr. Gahir.
In favor?
Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Oui.
Mr. Généreux,
Oui.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Viss,
Yes.
Mr. Fast,
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire,
En faveur.
Mr. Massey.
Yes, please.
Yeas pour 11, nays contre 0.
So clause 21 carries. Moving on to clause 22. Are there any questions or comments? Est-ce qu'il y a des commentaires sur la...
Any questions or comments? Clause 22.
I think, if I'm reading this right, 22 is is it the transitional provisions? So, is there anything different or new? What are the transitional arrangements that you're talking about here? How much time before this comes into effect once the bill passes through Parliament?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The transitional provision states that the new amendments will apply to investments undergoing the national security review process on or after the day on which Clause 15 comes into force, unless the investment has been referred to the GIC under subsection 2536A already, or the non-Canadian has received a notice indicating that no further action will be taken for the investment, subsection 2536B. Further, for investments where a notice under subsection 2532 of the former Act has been sent before Clause 15 comes into force, the Minister shall send to the non-Canadian and Canadian business or entity a new notice under subsection 2532 of the new Act, which will replace the old notice. The review timeline for these investments will be extended or reset by virtue of Clause 15 coming into force. Overall, the transitional provisions allow the Minister's new authority to accept undertakings and impose interim conditions as described in Clause 15 to apply to investments that are currently subject to the extended national security review under the unamended ICA without disrupting review timelines or inadvertently allowing an extension of review timelines.
So that's a lot of stuff. Let's see if I can simplify it. I don't know if I got it right, but if I can simplify it. So, when this comes into force, anything that's already in progress is subject to the Act before amendment, and anything that comes into the minister after the changes is subject to the new process. Is that correct?
Right. So anything that's not concluded but is already underway gets subject to the new provisions, but not without a change in timelines. Anything that's already past the point of like if it's received, for instance, it's either at the GIC or it's at the point where we've already indicated that it can proceed, will not be subject to the new provisions because it's already at either the final decision stage of an order or it's already been concluded. And everything new, yes, everything new gets subject to the new provisions.
Anything that's in progress, does the clock start at the beginning or like the 45 days?
Exactly where it was.
So if it was 20 days in, it still remains 20 days in, or?
That's correct.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Shan, any other questions, comments on Clause 22?
Comments on clause 22. Shall clause 22 carry? Recorded vote. Madame la Greffière.
Madam Clerk.
Yes.
Mr. Sorbara,
Yes, please.
Mr. Cahir,
In favor?
Madame Lapointe,
En faveur?
Mr. Van Bynen,
In favor.
Mr. Généreux,
Oui.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Viss. Yes. Mr. Fast. Yes. Monsieur Lemire,
En faveur.
Mr. Massey.
Yes.
Yeas pour 11, nays contre 0.
So clause 22 carries. Moving on to the coming into force provision, clause 23. Monsieur Perkins.
What's the normal period of time after it's received royal assent? Is there a normal time for, I think this clause is the governor and council sets the date. So is this something that's going to be done quickly, or is it going to be something that, is going to be a couple of months? What's the intent of the, do you know, or maybe you don't know the intent of the governor and council yet on it? I don't know.
Mr. Chair, the provisions allow for the governor and council to set to fix the date for the coming into force, so as to allow the flexibility for the government to come into force when the amendments to the regulations are in place. And so this simply allows for the regulatory process to ensure that we can actually catch up and that all of it can come into force together.
So is that months, years, weeks?
I
Don't.
can't speak for the minister, Mr. Chair, but I would suggest that there is great urgency to proceeding with the changes to this act.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I had Mr. Viss.
I'm just trying to figure out what I want.
We're at clause 23. So, Mr. Viss, if you don't have any questions, we'll proceed to vote, record vote on clause 23, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Fillmore,
In favor.
Mr. Sorbara,
In favor, please.
Mr. Kahir,
In favor.
Madame Lapointe,
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen,
In favor.
Mr. Généreux,
Wait.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Viss. Yes. Mr. Fast,
Yes.
Mr. Lemire,
Wait.
Mr. Massey.
Yes, please.
Yeas pour 11, nays contre 0.
So, clause 23 is carried, which brings us back to clause 7, which we had stood before in our previous meeting, and there was a sub-amendment that was moved to CPC2 by MP Gair. And just to be sure that we're all on the same page, the sub-amendment that had been moved by Mr. Gair when we decided to stay the review of clause 7 is the sub-amendment referenced 1254067, if I'm not mistaken. And so I will yield the floor to Mr. Gair to speak to his sub-amendment
Great.
to CPC2. Mr. Gair.
Thank you, Chair. So there's actually 3 different clauses that our amendments would affect. It would affect Clause 4, Clause 7, and Clause 8. And we can take it in 3 parts because there was 3 amendments. Now, with CPC2, the issue that we had was that it would probably lead to legal challenges and retaliation against Canadian investors, such as Canadian pension funds. So and this was supported by testimony from the officials as well last time. Our compromise was threefold. First of all is the need to change the period of time prescribed for the subsections in Section 15 because it's not enough time. So the amendment would replace 21 days with 45 days. 45 days would match other relevant review periods in the Act. This would impact Clause 4, and we would need UC to unanimous consent to go back and obviously amend Clause 4 as well. The reference is 125430001, and it was shared with the committee. That'll be the second one.
Okay, Mr. Gayer, I think we got a little confused because the amendment you're proposing is not on Clause 7, which is what we're debating right now. You're moving an amendment to Clause 4, and you're right, it would need unanimous consent, but that will have to be dealt with after we first disposed of the clauses that were stayed in a previous meeting. So now...
Okay, so it's 7. So then it's...
The articles that were stayed,
Yeah.
the clauses that were stayed, we've got Clause 7 first, new Clause 8, yeah, that's in Clause 7, Mr. Viss. We've got Clause 8.1, which is NDP 2, and then we've got Clause 12, which is CPC 5, CPC 6, Lib 0.3, and then we can move to the amendment you're proposing
Sure.
on Clause 4, which will require unanimous consent. So right now we're on Clause 7, and
Sure.
I believe the sub-amendment that you had on Clause 7, if I'm not mistaken, is the one referenced, so the reference number. Precisely.
Yeah. So it's just that all three of these will relate to CPC2. That's why I brought them up initially. We can proceed with...
Do relate.
Sure.
They do relate to CPC2, which relates to Clause 7, which is why we're debating it now.
Sure. Okay, so then moving the sub-amendment, do I need to move it again, or it's already been moved?
Well, yes, because I believe you were not moving the sub-amendment that we're discussing, so yes, you would need to move the
Okay, so
sub-amendment.
I'd like to move a sub-amendment to CPC2. The reference is 1254065.7, which is the one we're discussing. And again, we're changing the time prescribed to 45 days from the 21 days. It'll make it in line with other review periods in the Act itself. And it'll give the Heritage and Treasury Board the actual time that's needed for review. And we can ask the officials if they have comments on that.
Mr. Shan, and thank you, Mr. Gay.
Briefly, Mr. Chair, as we understand it, this amendment would do a couple of important things. One, as noted, it would amend the time frame by which the review would take place, and so it changes it to 45 days. As noted, we need to issue the notice to the investor. We need to consult provinces and territories, and then actually conduct the review of the relative net benefit of the investment. And so 45 days is reasonable. 21 days, in our view, is too short. The second portion is reducing the overall scope of state-owned enterprises that would be subject automatically to a net benefit review, regardless of threshold, by removing those that Canada has a trade that constitutes a trade agreement investor. That's a defined term in the Act. It also relates to the threshold that's set for those for which we have a trade agreement investor.
Yes, Mr. Viss.
If you, in the context of what Mr. Shan was saying, because I think this is an important point, a non-Canadian state-owned enterprise that is a trade agreement investor.
Unless the non-Canadian is a trade agreement investor, as in they are subject to a trade agreement with Canada.
Okay.
Yeah. So that narrows the scope, which, as we noted at the previous meeting, reduces the overall trade risk, notwithstanding that there are others for whom we have other trade obligations. And then this simply ensures that we can send that non-Canadian investment a notice for review.
Okay, I've got Mr. Yes, Mr. Perkins.
Can I, just on a point of order, can I just take a couple of minutes? I just want to compare the things. Can we have it suspend for a few moments while we
We'll suspend,
check this against the
We'll
Act?
suspend briefly so you can compare to CPC2, which is what this sub-amendment is changing. So we'll suspend briefly. sub-amendment proposed by Mr. Gahir. I believe members have had the time to compare with CPC2, which is what this sub-amendment is amending. So, Mr. Perkins, I see Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these things, I appreciate the flexibility to try and figure this out. Want to make it sure it's right. So this is, as you know, and we've talked about it, this is one of our key amendments, and Mr. Fillmore and government members have been very cooperative on this. So my understanding from talking briefly with Mr. Gahir, this one also does require us to do some other things if it were to pass in some subsequent sections if it were to pass, and therefore we would have to do unanimous consent to go back there. So if it passes, I don't have any problem with that. I just want to make sure I understand it. So the purpose, the primary purpose of CPC2, as we know, is to really deal with this issue of how we approach state-owned enterprises in terms of the thresholds within the Act and what the minister has the ability to choose to review and not to review. The rationale, and I'll just go over the rationale a bit for the amendment because it's important in my view to make sure I understand the context of the sub-amendment. So the context of CPC2 was that in its current form that, and I believe the ICA nor bill requires an automatic filing for a net benefit review if the state-owned enterprise, it's a formula, I understand it, so I think it's this year, it's $512 million, is that correct? If the acquisition is below $512 million in asset value, I guess, is it asset value? Right. So as a consequence of that, any state-owned enterprise can acquire anything basically below that unless the minister asks for a national security review, right? And that's possible under that threshold, but not for net benefit. Is that correct?
Two separate reviews, Mr. Chair. So net benefit reviews, as the member has outlined, are subject to thresholds, and so the SOE threshold is based on asset sales and is currently set at $512 million. National security reviews are separate, and national security reviews happen on all investments and are separate. So it's not if the minister so chooses. It is a function of the Act.
So in the question of what we're trying to capture here, which is, I think, the spirit of the sub-amendment, which I think the government's worked on to try and figure out what it was we were getting at, the issue of some of the things I'm seeing, for example, in my community, we're seeing, Mr. Fillmore, we're seeing in Nova Scotia with some of the assets well below this ceiling being acquired and not subject to any review, even including a net benefit review. And all politics is local, so I often talk about the lobster industry and the processors, the buyers being acquired at, prices of $5 to $10 million. And as they gain control, as has happened to some extent with some of the licenses in the BC fishing industry or some of the crab licenses, none of that gets subject for a net benefit review. Obviously, it could be subject to, if the Competition Bureau decided to want to investigate it, they have some authority. So I was trying to capture that issue where we have basically hostile states that can be hostile today, but maybe weren't a few years ago, that those automatically get this kind of review. And I think what Mr. Gahir's amendment does is it gets it more focused, I assume, is it to ensure that we're not in breach of certain types of trade agreements?
Mr. Chair, that's how we understand the purpose of the sub-amendment, is to reduce the overall trade risk by focusing on those to whom we don't have who are not a trade investor country.
So a trade agreement investor, could you help define that for me, what that is and how that differs between different types of agreement? Because we're members of, we've got bilaterals, we've got WTO, we've got multilateral.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the current ICA defines trade agreement investors as referenced in the current legislation as including, it's actually included in Section 1411(6) of the Act. It includes many of Canada's biggest trading partners. So an illustrative, non-exhaustive list, just to be helpful, would include the United States, Mexico, the United Kingdom, all of the countries under the Comprehensive European Trade Agreement. I'm sorry, I needed to remember my acronyms, including France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and others. All of the signatories to the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership countries, which would include Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, New Zealand, Japan, New Zealand, and others, as well as our trade investor countries of Chile, Peru, Colombia, and South Korea.
Good, Mr. Chair. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, I guess, it would be included as part of that.
CPTPP is included. Yes.
Not all have various levels of open or closed markets, but we're a signatory to that. The United States, I guess, isn't. So regardless of what that not necessarily democratic country that has signed that is and what their intents with their state-owned enterprises are, if we narrow the definition based on this sub-amendment, then they are exempted from any review regardless of what their economic or political intent is.
So to clarify, Mr. Chair, they would not be, if their investment was below the threshold set out in the Act, they would not be subject to a net benefit review. Those investments would still be reviewed under the national security review provisions of the Act.
Could be reviewed, may be reviewed, not shall.
Are reviewed.
Are reviewed, no matter what.
Are reviewed.
Okay. The rationale, and I think Mr. Gahir may have mentioned it when he introduced this, but could you comment on the need to be 45 days? Because I know the intent of this, a lot of the intent of a lot of amendments in this bill to the ICA are to enable a speedier process, maybe a more thorough process, but a speedier process, which is why we put a shorter period of time in here for this provision, because we thought that would be something that could be determined fairly quickly. And I take it from what's being proposed here, we might have been too aggressive in understanding how quickly you could make that kind of determination.
So, Mr. Chair, a net benefit review, as I noted, would require us to notify the investor, would also require us to consult with provinces and territories, and also then to actually conduct the merits of the investment. 21 days is simply not, in our estimation, possible to be able to do. Without commenting for my colleagues who have a 21-day time lock on their net benefit reviews, I would suggest that their experience has been that 21 days is insufficient.
When you say consult with, you're not talking about any time we do this, we consult with every province, do you?
No, but it allows us the chance to be able to consult with provinces and territories where warranted.
Oh, to notify them that the company that may be located there or doing business there is now subject to a view, so don't get too excited yet about what may or may not occur with that company?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we seek to ensure that there's that we've lived up to our obligations to loop in provinces and territories as required, where they potentially also may have commensurate authorities.
We were talking about Bill C-42 last night in the House, which I know you guys are very familiar with. So in doing that determination, On every one of these cases, do you determine who the beneficial owner of the acquiring company is?
So we do require the ultimate beneficial owner to be provided to us at the time of application.
And are those ever made public?
The application of the investor is subject to the confidentiality provisions of the Investment Canada Act.
Which means not usually, is that right?
Correct.
Right, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know, I think Mr. Fast may have some questions. He's just looking something up.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, we're on the sub-amendment proposed by Mr. Guerrier. If this passes, then we'll move back to CPC2 as amended to discuss CPC2. But Mr. Fast on the sub-amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't hear Mr. Gahir actually explain his rationale for introducing this amendment. Could I ask him to do that? And then I'll follow up on that.
I guess he said it to me.
Yes, you did. Very eloquently, too, actually.
Thanks. So the worry that we have with CPC2 is the fact that it could lead to legal challenges. Canadian pension funds, for example, if there's a reciprocal protection of investments from the other side, then Canadian pension funds could be seen, could face potential legal challenges. And we're sort of protecting from that by narrowing CPC2. But it's a threefold narrowing. One is changing it from 21 days to 45 days just to make it more realistic based on the officials' comments. The second is to add a section to make sure that the actual investor gets notified. And lastly, it's to make sure that it's applied to SOEs in countries that we don't have trade agreements with. Again, just to narrow CPC2 to make sure that we don't open up our what could be perceived as Canadian companies that are seen as state-owned enterprises to legal challenges abroad.
Okay, so I think you've confirmed what I suspected, and that is this is about making sure Canada complies with its trade agreements, because virtually all of our trade agreements have got investment provisions, chapters, very significant investment chapters, where we provide advantageous access to our economy, and it's reciprocal. And if the CPPIB were investing abroad, obviously we'd want to make sure its investments could be made without another trade agreement partner standing in the way of its obligations under that trade agreement. So, to make it very simple, this is about our compliance with our existing trade agreements. I'm going to ask the officials just a question. I just want to be very clear here. What review are we talking about? Are we talking about net benefit reviews? Or are we talking about national security reviews? This looks like net benefit reviews.
That's right. This CPC2 amends the provisions related to who is subject to a net benefit review, and this shifts the threshold essentially to zero if the investor is from a state-owned is a state-owned enterprises.
Because some of our trade agreements are with countries that have very significant state-owned enterprises, and where those state-owned enterprises are the primary investors abroad. Countries like, say, Vietnam, or even more importantly, Malaysia, which is a CPTPP trade partner. And they would be excluded from this provision, correct?
Under the sub-amendment, they would not be subject to a net benefit threshold of zero.
And that's because they have preferential treatment under our trade agreement.
They have most favored nation obligations, yeah.
Well, it's beyond most favored nation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Fast. Any other comments regarding the sub-amendment that's been moved? Mr. Généreux. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I was going to ask the officials the following question, if I may. When it comes to, in English, well, it's called a trade treaty, and the trade treaty that my colleague Mr. Fast was referring to, are there any other trade treaties or arrangements between various nations that this bill would target at some point down the track? Future treaties, would they also be subject mandatorily to this legislation going forward? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the member. The sub-amendment indicates or provides for a concept, an arrangement that is defined in law currently and that includes bilateral and multilateral agreements with the country in question. And that list includes CUSMA countries, TPCPT countries, and other bilateral agreements. Now, were Canada to enter into an agreement with another country, that would be included in the definition, and that country would enjoy the same protection, the same treatment as other countries defined under the legislation. It doesn't include all arrangements that Canada has entered into with other countries. For example, the World Trade Organization, sorry, Mr. Chairperson, I couldn't remember the acronym in French, nor does it include other kinds of agreements that are less formal, shall we say, including foreign investment arrangements or the protection thereof. There are a whole slew of other arrangements that fall under the bar provided for in the legislation. Do you have any examples to give me, sir, of other particular agreements that are less formal than the CPTPP, for example? Response. There's the whole notion of digital cooperation agreements. They're not formal agreements between countries. They're arrangements. And there's also the notion of an arrangement to protect foreign investment, FIPA in English, and FIPAs are entered into with various other countries. I'm not sure if you recall, but there was testimony from Jim Basile from RIM, I believe, the former CEO of RIM, unless I'm mistaken. Yes, the BlackBerry gentleman. Yes, that old former company. Now, in his previous testimony, he indicated that Canada was a laggard when it comes to business, and technological developments were moving so fast, and so it was so omnipresent that we were being left behind. Now, this legislation, obviously we need to focus in on the sub-amendment, but it's a part of a whole here. So, writ large, is this bill under its current format, including the amendments and sub-amendments, will it target other potential agreements? It's interesting because you referred to quasi-formal or less formal or informal agreements, or rather arrangements to do with technology and so on and so forth. Future agreements, would they be subject to this bill, to this legislation? In light of what Mr. Basile said, well, he didn't say we were light years behind, but he said vis-à-vis Europe, we were certainly not well advanced in terms of the way we do business, especially in relation to new technologies. So I'm not sure if you have a handle on my question. Response. No, I do understand your question. There are a lot of aspects to your question, but if I may, Mr. Chairperson, I'll start with the following. It's important to recognise and acknowledge that there are aspects of Canada's Investment Act that includes intangible assets and digital assets, including and notwithstanding guidelines concerning the treatment of intellectual property under the Canada Investment Act. Now, concerning the second part of your question, agreements. There's digital issues, new technology, and in the most recent agreements that Canada entered into, there are chapters on international or on intellectual property. For example, CETA and CUSMA, there are sections on intellectual property. And they were, in fact, very sensitive areas of interest when these agreements were negotiated. Now, Canada is continuing to bear in mind the development of new technologies when it bargains or negotiates new agreements, and what it would behoove Canada to do with a view to making sure Canada is on a par with other leading countries in the global economy. If I may, Mr. Chairperson, Mr. Basili referred to very specific matters, and in his brief stated very clearly a number of things. Could I just read those two paragraphs out loud, if I may? He uses specific technology, and I just want us to be on the same page. Technological and security risks shouldn't be analysed separately. Intellectual property and data has multi-dimensional factors and effects that lead to dual-use technologies that have a bearing on national security. Tangible assets and their value should be factored in a holistic manner, as well as any spin-offs for the economy when it comes for assets. The list of technological assets and risk factors is incomplete and must be in harmony with our allies, for example, the United States. Do you believe that this sub-amendment that's being moved and the bill in its entirety reflect the concerns that Mr. Balizili is raising? I recall, and it struck me, he said that we as a country, even with this new legislation in its current format, we were not geared to face the future in terms of our relationship with our trade partners. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, for the question. Well, first of all, when it comes to the treatment of intellectual property and data, there are directives when it comes to national security considerations. And there's a huge section on intellectual property that deals with that. Now, the Canada Investment Act does indeed factor in those aspects. As far as a requirement regarding sensitive technologies is concerned, and matters of national security, well, that is one of the reasons why it is of the utmost importance to give the minister broad discretion when it comes to factoring in all of these issues. As Mr. Basili indicated, IP and IP data and national security are cross-cutting and intertwined. Those considerations overlap when it comes to investments, and that is one of the very reasons why it's important to ensure that the minister has a fully fledged capacity to factor in those considerations and bear them in mind. And The minister, therefore, would develop guidelines when it comes to intellectual property with a view to national security concerns. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you, Mr. Généraux. Mr. Vice.
So under Part 3 of the Act, investments subject to notification in the case of establishing, well, in the case of our amendment and the sub-amendment, the amendment issuing an order for the review within 21 days to be amended by 45 days. It was stated that by Mr. Gahir that changing the notification time from 21 days to 45 days would prevent lawsuits. Why would the change of time or a condition by the Government of Canada, and if you want to clarify that for me, yeah, that's great, yeah.
Conjunction of all three, right? The lawsuits is mainly relating to the final point where we are narrowing that CPC to be applied to SOEs that we don't have trade agreements with.
Yeah,
it was
so
mainly
limiting to the SOEs, that's one point.
That's one point.
SOEs we don't have trade agreements with. Yeah.
Yep. The second one was to add a section to make sure that the investors actually get notified that they'll face this review.
The investors that are subject to the review are notified.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the first, so we're going in reverse order now, but the first one was the changing it from 21 days to 45 days. And the officials, I think, have testified multiple times to the fact that, it's just not realistic, 21 days, and 45 days will make it more in line with the rest of the review periods in the Act.
Right, so 21 days, it applies to state-owned enterprises that we don't have a trade agreement with, and 21 days to 45 days for notification. But what I'm concerned about is the incomplete, there's conditions that a state-owned enterprise in this case would be subject to in their notification to the Government of Canada, correct? What do they actually have to tell the Government of Canada when they notify them of either establishing a Canadian business or an investment to acquire control of a Canadian business?
So the form that is included at the time of the notification has multiple fields. It includes information related to the investor, information related to the investment, information related to the nature of the investment, and so all of that is provided at the time of application.
Okay, so my question is, the section also has a subparagraph 2 under. Subparagraph 2 under Clause 13. I always get my language screwed up on this. On page 10 of the Act, it talks about an incomplete notice. Do we need to consider the application of either the 21 or 45 days, which I think there's all agreement that we're going to accept, in respect to an incomplete notice, and whether we need to look at changing an incomplete notice as well, if there would be if we should associate a time frame with that clause as well.
The timeline for an application begins at the time of certification, and certification constitutes a completed application. As in, if an incomplete application would not be considered certified.
So if the application is deemed incomplete, the timeline would be irrelevant.
Correct.
Thank you.
Certification prompts the 45 days.
Okay.
Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to take a bit of time here to talk about my main concern, because I want to make sure that all those who are watching understand why we're spending so much time on CPC2 and this amendment, because of my concern about China's growing influence, which I believe is is not only military, but our main threat that we're seeing in, I think, Western countries is an economic takeover, which in some ways is more powerful to try and take over assets and find the wiggle room in our rules, as we're a generous and open country, as are most Western countries, when we like to play fair by the rules. In our meeting 71, May 3rd, Dr. Patrick LeBlond, the Associate Professor, Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Ottawa. He appeared as an individual And he said any state-owned enterprise, regardless of where it's from in the world, should notify an acquisition to the minister, should be notified an acquisition. The minister should then decide whether this flies or not, and again be able to justify if there is a decision to not investigate it. Now we're, with our amendment and with the sub-amendment, quite narrowing it. There are lots of countries, most countries I suspect have, a lot have some form of state-owned enterprise, either at a national or a subnational level, and some of them get and make acquisitions extraterritoriality. Generally our state-owned enterprises in Canada, I'm not aware that they've done any, but I assume that you would, by way of the way this bill was drafted and the government's proposed amendments, the government doesn't believe that we should be reviewing all state-owned enterprises for net benefit and what the motivation might be regardless of where they are. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that the Investment Canada Act balances a number of very critical public policy priorities, one of which is the continued free exchange of investment between global trading nations and ensuring that we allow Canadian enterprises to be able to participate in the global economy with the same degree of frictionless access or minimized friction as possible, while at the same time preserving the legitimate right of states to be able to ensure that investments into their jurisdictions are in fact of both net benefit and of non-injury to the national security of their people and country. And so the various aspects of the Act strike an attempt to try and ensure that we actually are preserving all of the capacities to the greatest degree against those various objectives. And so hence the rationale for which we have maintained thresholds under which investments will not be subject to net benefit reviews, thereby corresponding with the global marketplace, but still allowing all investments to be reviewed under national security provisions. And then what this modernization does is ensure that we've actually got additional mechanisms in place under the Act to allow for that to be as thorough and as considered as possible, including the capacity for the minister to reach undertakings and for ensuring that the process is complete.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I guess I just like to add a little color, just because I am, as I've said before in previous meetings on clause by clause on this act, I'm just concerned, and I like to make sure that the minister has both the suspenders and the belt as we've got through to make sure there's certainty, because when was the last time this act was reviewed?
Just being reminded by my colleagues, so there were amendments to the Act in 2016, but the most substantive amendments would have dated back to 2009. Right,
so it's quite a while. So we really have, I don't know if any of us will be in Parliament. Some are younger. Mr. Gahir probably.
I was there.
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure that Mr. Matt. I don't.
Had a different color then.
Yeah, the beard was a different color. I don't think Mr. Massey and myself may not. I don't know if we'll be here another 15 years or so when the big next review might go through. So we have to get this right. And I'm concerned because, as I've said before, I don't believe that the government, with all of the flexibility it's had, and I'm not seeing that some of this is doing what we need it to do, that it's enabling the protection of our assets. So, for example, we know that in 2017, when Norsat was bought by Hytera, and I'm going to speak a few minutes about Hytera, bought by Hytera, and Norsat, Vancouver-based, which bought Sinclair Technologies in 2011 from that. These are important telecommunications company. That national security review and obviously, I guess, a net benefit review wasn't done. And we know that there have been contracts, and I know that doesn't directly relate to this, although we did have some testimony from some witnesses that were concerned that, for example, in 2020, the Department of Foreign Affairs awarded a contract to China-based Newtech, which was founded by the son of the former Chinese Communist Party Secretary General to provide X-ray equipment in our embassies and consulates. And we know that we've talked before about neolithium. Leonithium was bought by a state-owned enterprise without a national security review, and the minister hasn't been given the power to go back, even though I've asked him if he would, and he said, I can't. And I won't go over the fact that some of those amendments that were allowed him were not accepted by the committee, but I still think it's a power that the minister should be trying to have. Although the minister was able to get more recent ones, the 3 divestitures through policy recently, and of course we know the RCMP awarded contracts, as did Canada Border Services Agency, to Hytera, which was approved by this government, by Minister Baines, to go forward, and by the Governor and Council. And Hytera, which is headquartered in Zhejiang, China, is partially owned by the People's Republic of China. And specifically, I'd like to just talk a bit about it, because the Internet's a wonderful thing. It's a supposedly, Hytera is a supposedly publicly traded company in China. And when I go through the financials that are available, that they post as a publicly traded company in China, and it's available on the Wall Street Journal's website, I see a company that doesn't make money, right? It doesn't make money. It has a lot of sales, but it doesn't make money. It has $6 billion of sales and has gone between net income loss in most years to fairly anemic profits of, say, $95 million on $6 billion of revenue. Now, that has basic EPS loss based on theirs last year of almost 800% earnings per share loss on a company that is clearly able to continue to exist in China without actually having profits. So one has to think that these companies, and it took 2 minutes for me to find this out, and I'm not privy to all the national security apparatus that the minister has at his disposal here, that publicly available information says that their EBITDA growth was down 48%, then down 8%, then the year before that down 40%. Their sales are stable, but they're spending more and more money to get those sales and losing more and more money every year. And so I would think in a net benefit review, which is what this amendment's about, in a net benefit review, we'd be looking at perhaps the financials of these companies to understand whether or not, as we would normally assume, they win the contracts and get access to companies in Canada, whether it's by underbidding in a government contract or whether it's by overpaying in an acquisition for a Canadian company, that they have a motivation that obviously is different than ours, because any acquisition that would be made by a Canadian company or I'll say a G7 company made of an asset in Canada is usually done based on sound business principles and a rate of return and a rate of capital return for investors, where they are not. They're losing more and more money every year, yet we don't seem to see that the government, with its power, is looking at it in the same way that I would if I were lucky enough to be in the position of the minister. And when you look at Sinclair makes a lot of high-end telecommunications equipment that gets installed within Canada. Norsat, the Vancouver-based company, makes a lot of essentially satellite communications. And in this world where, just look around this table, we're all connected, everyone's looking at their phones and trying to do things. Access to that data, access to the hardware of our country and our industries and our security system when it comes to the RCMP or Canadian Border Service Agency, And that access isn't just about the technical access. The Minister of Public Safety was here on this issue and said, good news, the radio frequency filters that Sinclair was installing in their Hytera Chinese ownership were not connected to the database, but that now China has access and knowledge of where all those key communications points for the RCMP is, where the hardware is across the country. And they have the ability, obviously, in my mind, to know where it is and figure out how to disrupt them if they're not. And I don't have access to all of those things. So when I look at national security, I not only look at whatever the intelligence agencies are telling us, but I also look at the question of whether or not in the net benefit review, would the net benefit review be looking at things like whether or not this is a credible purchase based on sound competitive business practices from a company that is actually driven by the profit motive and driven by the same things that our companies would be driven by, that would say, hey, it's okay for that, even in the case where you narrow it to the trade agreement companies, state-owned enterprises only, being under review under $512 million, that those companies would also be looked at in terms of what would be the national motivation. And how does that motivation fit with our net interest, which is to develop increasingly competitive companies with strong IP? So I'm wondering if you could tell me in the net benefit review whether or not we look at those kinds of things, or is it strictly, you know what, that's a company that doesn't have a huge market share, or we're not overly dependent on, so it doesn't really matter what the motivation of the acquiring company is.
Mr. Chair, I'd offer a few considerations with respect to the question of the member. One, obviously, just maybe to note that there is an increasing number of pre-revenue and other companies that are not necessarily on the basis of their financial books earning profits, but yet are still very much active in the marketplace. And I won't name names of companies in the space, but obviously the financials are one consideration, but a lack or not of profit is not necessarily an indication of relevancy to the market. But more specifically to the question of the member with respect to what we take into account when it comes to a net benefit review, I would note the broadness of the factors that are laid out within the Act at Section 20, and that includes the effect of the investment on the level and nature of economic activity in Canada, including, without limiting the generality of the foregoing, the effect on employment, on resource processing, on the utilization of parts, components, and services produced in Canada, and on exports from Canada. B, the degree and significance of participations by Canadians in the Canadian business or new Canadian business and in any industry or industries in Canada of which the Canadian business or a new Canadian business forms or would form a part. C, the effect of the investment on productivity, industrial efficiency, technological development, product innovation, and product variety in Canada. D, the effect of the investment on competition within any industry or industries in Canada. E, the compatibility of the investment with national, industrial, economic, and cultural policies, taking into consideration industrial, economic, and cultural policy objectives enunciated by the government or legislature of any province likely to be significantly affected by the investment. And F, the contribution of investment to Canada's ability to compete in the world. It is then also important to note that we have then specific guidelines with respect to state-owned enterprises, where it is the policy of the Government of Canada to ensure that the governance and commercial orientation of state-owned enterprises are considered in determining whether reviewable acquisitions of control in Canada by the state-owned enterprise are of net benefit to Canada. In so doing, investors will be expected to address in their plans and undertakings the inherent characteristics of state-owned enterprises, specifically that they are susceptible to state influence, and investors will also need to demonstrate their strong commitment to transparent and commercial operations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That was very good and comprehensive. And just a quick question, maybe a quick answer, because I know we're tight on time. So in consideration of the couple of amendments that have been before, in that list, that net benefit list, so would the disposition of Canadian-owned IP and its ultimate loss or movement out of the country and or data, privacy data on individuals or Canadian companies. Would that form part of that analysis, which I think was D or E?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would offer simply that we very much consider those factors to be included within the considerations for net benefit review.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. So if there are no more comments or questions on the sub-amendment proposed by Mr. Gahir, I will ask Madam Clerk that we put it to a vote.
Mr. Fillmore.
En faveur.
Mr. Sorbara.
En faveur.
Mr. Gahir.
In favor?
Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen.
En faveur.
Mr. Généreux.
Oui.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Viss. Mr. Williams.
En faveur.
Mr. Lemire.
En faveur, et j'aimerais souligner la qualité du...
And I'd like to congratulate all my colleagues on their wonderful French.
Yes, please. Oui.
Yeas pour 11, 11, nays contre 0, 0.
Merci à tous. Donc,
Thank you, everyone. So, Mr. Gahir's sub-amendment carries. That brings us to the main amendment, CPC2. Are there questions or comments in relation to CPC2? Mr. Perkins.
I'll make this quick because I think we have been over this quite a bit. I think the officials have been great. I thank the government members for getting to the root of, and the officials to getting to the root of what we were trying to do, which is I didn't ever intend to exclude countries that we have, a good trading relationship with. This was really meant to be focused on others, and so I appreciate the goodwill with which the government and officials have treated this amendment going forward, and I hope, given all that we'll get support around this table for this amendment into the bill.
thank you, Mr. Perkins. Yes, and it's in the spirit of this collaborative committee. So thank you for these words. So are there any more questions and comments on CPC2 as amended? No? So then, Madam Clerk, I'll ask for the vote.
Mr. Fillmore.
En faveur.
Mr. Sorbara. Mr. Gahir.
In favor?
Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Oui.
Mr. Généreux.
Oui.
Mr. Perkins.
Enthusiastically, yes.
Mr. Viss.
I think we just did one of the biggest things for investment in Canada in a generation. Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Oui.
Mr. Lemire.
Oui.
Mr. Massey.
Yes, but I still prefer NDP 1, which was identical and needed identical triage. But thanks to the mover, Mr. Perkins, on this. Very impressive. And the fix.
Okay, donc l'amendement CPC.
Amendment CP2 amended is carried.
Carry as amended. Yes. Carried. This brings us to 6:50, and we started the meeting at about 4:50. So I want to. Is there something, Mr. Perkins? You. Yeah, we just did 7. Then that will need unanimous consent when we come back, unless
Where is it?
unless there's unanimous consent now. But I don't think you will have unanimous consent to get back to clause 7 at this point. But
If I could ask the indulgence, maybe because I think we're running short on time, if we could agree, because with Mr. Gahir's table dropped, we're going to need unanimous consent to make some of the other, I think it's clause 4, consistent with what we just did. So I'll
You'll-
ask
you'll-
for unanimous consent to be able to introduce
You'll
one more,
bring it back in due time.
if that's okay.
Okay, so that concludes the time we had for committee today. Je veux remercier.
I'd like to thank the officials, first and foremost. They've been with us for quite some time, dealing with Bill C-34, the clerk, legislative clerk, staff.
Moving quickly in the fall. There's a lot that's been done already, so just a few more clauses to get through. And on that note, I wish everyone a good summer. It's been a privilege and an honor to chair this committee.
And if I could say, Mr. Chair, you do a wonderful job on this committee. I very much enjoy it, and I hope you remain the chair and then coming back, because I think we have great hearings, whether it's on this or our studies, and I really love your approach to chairing. So.
Merci. Thank you very much, folks, and merci aux interprètes. Merci.
Thanks to the interpreters, thanks to the support staff, to the clerk, to everyone. Have a great summer. Look after yourselves.